Well, good morning. Welcome. I'm very happy to see so many people early in the morning for this very exciting morning sick contextual factors. I would, on a personal level, start by saying, although I'm not rich and famous like Simon Cowell, I think it's fair to say you are now into the X Factor show. Because unlike what the rest of OMRECT, or the majority of OMRECT, is about, being dependent variables outcomes, this group is explicitly about things that are collected prior to exposure, meaning baseline measures. I think that's helpful conceptually to some of you who think in terms of epidemiology and stuff. I think that'll help you a lot in terms of clarifying, because all the other groups are about outcomes, dependent variables. And for those of you who write notation, that's why X factor is fun, because usually we use the Y for outcome measures. So that's why. So the X and the Y is at OMRECT as always. I've received a couple of housekeeping things I'm supposed to say. I think the first one is please don't smoke in here. Oh, that's an old note. Okay. And please keep your phones available. Unlike other meetings, we like you to be ready to do polling, actually quite a few. And we have some participants online, I hope. It's at least the idea. And I'm very happy to almost see you too somewhere. I would, like the other previous meetings, please keep your microphones on mute and do your comments and questions in the chat, and then Annelise will take care of raising them as questions and comments at a later stage. And I've been asked in terms of legacy, legal issues, to remind everybody that we plan to record this session, but it will only be used for internal use. Yes. And as always, we would like to have the manual paper work on who's in the room. So we'll circulate the paper with your names and your interests. And I think those were my need to says. So without too much further ado, I think I would like to introduce our just recently appointed European co-chair, Sabrina Meyer-Nielsen, who will take us through this busy day.
Thank you very much. So the first thing on the agenda is the aim and current projects of the Contextual Factors Working Group. I made a little timeline to give you a brief overview. In the beginning, we did a lot of working group meetings where we clarified our aim. And our aim includes providing an operationalized definition and guidance on how to address contextual factors in rheumatology trials when developing core outcome sets. Further, we aim to provide a generic set of important contextual factors that should always be considered in rheumatology trials. And by generic, we mean important across rheumatic diseases. To develop our definition, we did semi-structured interviews and a Delphi survey to reach consensus. And we published our definition after the OMRECT meeting in 2020, together with this figure that shows that we found 3 types of contextual factors that we call effect modifying contextual factors, outcome influencing contextual factors, and measurement affecting contextual factors. So now we're here at OMRECT 2023, and we have 3 active projects right now. That includes 2 scoping reviews with our fellows on the 2 first type of contextual factors, effect modifying and outcome influencing contextual factors, and then an overview and tutorial on reporting effect modifying contextual factors in trials. In the future, we hope to do a Delphi to reach consensus on a generic set of important effect modifying contextual factors as a start, and followed by voting. And then we'll of course support activities on the 2 other type of contextual factors in other working groups. So the aim for today is to generate candidates of important contextual factors. And that's because we want to use that for our Delphi survey, together with the results from a working group survey. and the results from our scope reviews. Now it's time for our first poll. It says, did you review our preparatory material before this sixth session? You can choose yes, I had a good look at it, or yes, I looked briefly at some of it, or no, not at all. Our preparatory material that includes a lay summary for this session, a cheat sheet that you also have on your tables, a video, and also a quiz. And to save time, we will also move into the next poll. I'll only show results from the second poll. It says, do you feel you understand the main idea of our definition of contextual factors? You can choose very well, moderately well, not at all, or just a little bit. And the voting, the poll, you find it in under contextual factors in the agenda. There is a bar under the video where it says, I think, details, and then polls in the right side. There's the polls. That's how it is with technical stuff. It can go wrong sometimes. Okay, let's move on. Doesn't matter. Yeah, so now I'll just go briefly through our definition of contextual factors. So I hope for those that feel they don't really understand contextual factors that well, that it can help a little bit. And also we do have the cheat sheets that you can look at during the discussion that also explains contextual factors briefly. And we have Francis also that will explain if, yeah, we'll get to that, it'll be fun. Okay, so what is confusing to many is that our definition describes different ways that contextual factors can influence the results of a trial. That being as effect modifying contextual factors that modifies the treatment effect and is relevant for personalized medicine. So you can show if certain patient subgroups have a better effect than others. Then we have outcome influencing contextual factors that predict the prognosis and may confound the results in non-randomized trials. Some would also call these prognostic factors. And then we have measurement affecting contextual factors that influence measurement properties at outcome measurement instruments. So these can show if an instrument performs well across different patient subgroups. A little bit related to what we discussed yesterday, but we'll get to that. For a specific factor to be considered a contextual factor, it needs to be either personal, disease-related, or environmental factor, because these are the categories of factors that the stakeholders found relevant to consider contextual factors. For example, it has been shown that sex seems to be important for axial spondyloarthritis, and actually there is evidence that sex can both be an effect modifying, outcome influencing, and measurement affecting contextual factor. So among axial spondylitis patients, women compared to men, they generally experience less effect from treatment, have a worse prognosis regarding disease activity, and is seen to have higher disease activity when assessed with the best eye instrument, but not when assessed with the SDS instrument. And it has been suggested that sex-specific thresholds are needed for the best eye instrument. I mentioned effect modifiers and confounders just before. Not everybody might be familiar with these terms. So Francis have prepared an edutainment to explain this.
Good morning, everybody. I will try to make a little bit of fun of a very, very bizarre concepts that are confounder or effect modifiers. For those who are not familiar with this concept, usually you are facing definitions that are given by specialists that look like that. You know, a very long text, very difficult to understand, but still it shows interesting things. For instance, if we take an example, we say if the effect of a treatment is different between younger and older patients, then the age is called an effect modifier. That's with the red arrow. It means the age, different ages, makes the response to treatment different. That can be approximately understandable. But confounders is a little bit more difficult. And if we take an example, there seems to be an association between alcohol intake and the occurrence of lung cancer. But this does not mean that alcohol causes the lung cancer. The link is really between smoking and lung cancer, as we all know. So what happens? What happens is that many people who drink alcohol are more likely to smoke and therefore to get the lung cancer. So we call that, it looks like there is an association between the alcohol and lung cancer if we do not take smoking into account. So smoking confuses the association, and it's called a confounder because there are two links in red with smoking with alcohol and smoking with lung cancer. This seems a little bit understandable, but I want to show another example where it can be a little bit more explicit for you. Recently, science has shown that the consumption of hot chestnuts is associated with the number of tick bites. The more the consumption of hot chestnuts, the less the number of tick bites. Is this a causal association? Meaning, is, in your opinion, chestnuts protective of tick bites? Or is there some other phenomenon that blurs the association? Can you please try to answer the poll 3, and give your opinion whether we are talking about a confounder, an effect modifier, or none of the above? Ah, thank you. So 77% think that it's confounder, 3% it's an effect modifier. Oh, it's changing? But approximately 3/4. Good. Good, good. Next slide. Indeed, winter season. Winter season is associated with increase in chestnut consumption, at least during the winter in the hemisphere. And winter season is associated with a decrease in ticks, so in tick bites. So it's the perfect definition of a confounder. Well, let's take another stage. Scenario B. If a chestnut tree parasite provokes a rarity of chestnut on the market, the association will decrease, right? So what role plays this chestnut tree parasite? Is it a confounder, an effect modifier, or none of the above? Please vote. Almost secured. 50% people think it's an effect modifier, 33% thinks it's none of the above, and 12% think it's a confounder. Interesting. What happened? Let's go back to the results. If you think in terms of association, the chestnut tree parasite is associated with chestnut production, but not with tick bites. It has no relationship with it. So it's neither an effect modifier nor a confounder. It needs to be a confounder to have the relationship with the both. Let's now go to scenario C. Let's talk about residency. Residency can influence the association as well. Urban people are less exposed to tick bites than rural residents. Makes sense. But urban people can buy hot chestnuts on ambulant tillers, and rural residents can have harvest and cook it themselves. So what role plays residency? Please vote confounder, effect modifier, or none of the above. So almost done, yes. 54% thinking it's an effect modifier, 30% a confounder, and 15% a none of the above. So what are the true results? Well, actually, The association in rural is stronger than in urban residents, which means residency has an effect on the association of it. So it's an effect modifier. So through these examples, you see that there are different kind of factors, including some that have no influence on the relationship itself. So let's have if you summarize that, the chestnut consumption association with tick bites doesn't make a lot of sense in itself. But we see that it has a relationship because of a link with winter season, and it can be influenced by residency, while it has no relationship with the chestnut tree parasite. Residency is an effect modifier, winter season is a confounder. So let's have a brief talk about association and causality. The scientific fact, observation, is that the consumption of hot chestnut is associated with a number of tick bites. But an association cannot be interpreted in terms of causality. There is a common cause to the two phenomena, season, and there is a factor that modifies the association, residency. Let's try now to transfer this to what we are familiar with in terms of medicine. Let's look at patients with axial spondyloarthropathy. We may easily infer from this scheme that the treatment medication is associated with an outcome like disease activity. TNF inhibitors, for instance, can be influencing disease activity. And the question is it the cause? As a clinician, you would say, of course, I prescribe that and I observe the effect, so it is a cause. But wait a minute, this association is not necessarily a cause, because we know that there is a factor like, for instance, the sex, which is linked to the degree of acceptance and effect of treatment, and associated as well with the degree of disease activity. On the other side, the sex itself modify the tolerance or the biological effect of treatment on outcome. So even if there is some relation between the both, it is modified by one and confounded by the same factor. For this reason, it is important, first of all, if you want to demonstrate a causality, to conduct clinical trials that will get rid of the confounders, and also to take into account the effect modifiers to interpret the results. That's why it's important to measure the sex in trial as a contextual factor, and to produce results separately in men and women to control for the effect modification. It's important also in the analysis to adjust for sex to avoid confusion. And finally, also we know that the measurement of the outcome in this particular case is affected by sex. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nidhi Goel. I'm going to present the patient research partner voice. Marika was very kind in helping me put the presentation together. So contextual factors in clinical trials and our involvement in this process. So this is just a listing of the patient research partners that have been involved in the contextual factors working group. And as some history, although patient research partners have been coming to OMERACT since 2002, their participation in the working groups was formalized in 2014. This is the participation ladder. Patient research partners can be involved at all levels, preferably from the beginning, and I'm happy to report that we were involved from the very beginning of this working group. This highlights to you why involving patients is important, both in clinical trials and in the contextual factors working group, and why we need to continue this work. So some quotes from patients from the Delphi. It would be good if you could find an example within rheumatology. So needing to really explain to them what this is so they can understand it. I think it's complex. I don't want to make it complex because I don't like statistics at all. I think many of us might echo that sentiment, but I want it to be clear. And I think for patients specifically, No offense to you, Robin. I actually do like statistics. I find this very interesting and satisfying due to the fact that I've felt that something has not been totally satisfying when I myself have participated in a clinical trial. So this is just a reminder for those of you who are not aware, there is a pile of paper in front of you that you can use to help reference and keep reminding yourself during this discussion what the different contextual factors are. Very nice cheat sheet prepared by the working group led by Sabrina. So two overarching statements. One of the things I would like to point out is that there is agreement related to contextual factors, and even better, higher level of agreement from the patients related to, I consider the 3 types of contextual factors to adequately cover the concept contextual factors. And this was based on voting that occurred in the 2021 virtual OMER Act meeting. And then I can distinguish between the 3 different types of contextual factors. And this was 93% patients voted in the affirmative and 86% of the clinicians. So now I'd like to turn it over to Bidat, who's going to do the next part of the presentation.
Midhat, can you hear me? It's our
yes, I can hear you.
Perfect, perfect. I'll be ready with the slides, so you just tell me when to switch.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Midhat, and I'm going to be discussing the preliminary results.
Midhat, can you talk a little louder? Midhat, a little louder, then because the sound is a little low here. Thank you so much.
Okay, can you hear me now?
A little higher if you can. It was really good in the beginning.
Okay, let me try. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Midhat, and I'm going to be discussing the results.
Oh, we need some IT guys. Try to say something. I think we found a volume button.
Okay, hello.
Still low. We'll need some. There's help coming now. So two sec. Yeah, can you try to speak?
Hello. Is it still low?
Okay, keep talking.
Okay. Continue.
I think it's getting louder now. Try to say something.
Okay, hello.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay,
we'll try again.
Okay. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Midhat, and I'm going to be discussing the preliminary results for our scoping review that involves the effect modifying contextual factors. The title for our research is Patient Characteristics and Stratification Factors Reported Within Rheumatology, a scoping review of randomized control trials in Cochrane reviews. So the goal of our study is to identify and summarize baseline patient characteristics as well as stratification factors, that is the potential effect modifying contextual factors that are reported in trial reports of randomized control trials across rheumatology. Our review will also provide an important overview by mapping potential effect modifying contextual factors candidates across rheumatology. It will also provide the basis for the next study seeking consensus on important candidate effect modifying contextual factors. Okay, next. So our aim is to include all randomized control trials published from the year 2010 onwards from the systematic reviews by the Cochrane Musculoskeletal Group. And once we have collected all the randomized control trials, we will then extract data on baseline patient characteristics and stratification factors in terms of domains and measures. We will also explore any cutoffs used for making subgroups for further analysis in the trial reports. And finally, we will summarize the extracted data using descriptive statistics and examine whether there are more commonly reported characteristics for certain diseases or intervention types. So at this point, our flow diagram is complete, and we are currently in the process of extracting data from the randomized control trials that we have included. And here, as you can see, this is our flow diagram. So we initially included 4,049 references from the systematic reviews by Cochrane Musculoskeletal Group. And after excluding 1,519 references, most of them were abstracts, we concluded 2,530 references to be assessed in full text. And when collecting full text PDFs, we then excluded all the duplicates, those published before the year 2010, and the ones that were not published in English. We were also unable to retrieve 35 PDFs as of today and are still working on locating them. So currently we have 564 references from 544 randomized control trials that are eligible for synthesis. And at present, we have only extracted 74 out of the 544 randomized control trials, and for sure have a long way to go. Okay, so I think now I'll hand it over to Max.
Thank you so much, Midhat. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to do a short overview about our other scoping review, which is about outcome influencing contextual factors. We aim to identify baseline variables that are commonly adjusted for in longitudinal observational studies in rheumatoid arthritis. And we started off with the publications that were already included in a previously conducted systematic review that was done by Angeles. I cannot, there you are. Thank you very much for providing us with these publications. So we applied, yeah, the Polish group, to them as well. Thank you very much. We started with these 1,623 publications and applied our own eligibility criteria to them, which means we included studies that were investigating the association between any exposure or intervention and a patient-centered or clinical outcome. We excluded cross-sectional studies, publications not in English, and conference abstracts. So in the next step, we are going to extract data both on study characteristics and on the variables that these studies adjusted for at baseline, and we'll describe them in terms of domains and measures. And eventually, we will summarize the data we will have found using descriptive statistics and provide the number of studies for each domain we will have found. If you have any more questions about our methodology, about our protocol, you can follow that link down there or scan the QR code and you will find our registered protocol. Right now, we have completed study selection just before AMARACT. And eventually, we hope that this scoping review will provide us with insights into candidate outcome influencing contextual factors and support the development of a consensus-based set of important outcome influencing contextual factors that should always be considered in future longitudinal observational studies. So as I said, we just finished study selection, so we might have a quick glance at our flow diagram. We excluded almost 1,300 publications already during abstract screening. And of the remaining about 300 publications, about 60 had to be excluded during full text assessment, mostly because they did not provide any exposure or intervention. They were cross-sectional, which is what wrong study type means, or they were just conference abstracts, which is what wrong publication type refers to. So right now we have 276 publications that are eligible for data extraction, and we will set up the data extraction form in the next step and initiate data extraction. Thank you.
Now I'll present results from the working group survey that we sent out in mid-March this year. And we asked all working groups this question. When thinking of your working group's area, which important contextual factors do you think of? And we asked this for each type of contextual factors. And we received response from 16 out of 35 working groups. And we are very happy with this response rate because it was relatively close to UMRACT, and this task might have been a bit difficult for many. So we're very satisfied and very thankful. We received many suggestions for factors. For effect modifying contextual factors, we received 80 suggestions. For outcome influencing contextual factors, 108, and for measurement affecting contextual factors, 36. Fortunately, many of these were duplicates. Many mentioned age and sex, for example, across the working groups. So those could be removed. Then there was a few that we did not consider contextual factors, and then a few that by nature were disease or topic specific that we also removed because we're looking for generic ones. So we ended up with 44, 49, and 21 suggested generic contextual factors for each type. And I have listed all of them here. And it would be very small font if I put them all on each line. So I put some on the same line that are a little bit related, separated with commas. So just keep in mind that when different factors are separated with comma. And to give you hopefully a little overview, easy overview, I organized them according to personal, disease-related, and environmental factors. And you can see that looks very much like what you have on your tables. And for the online participants, there's a link in the chat where you have access to the same thing as the papers on the tables. And you may notice that concomitant fibromyalgia and pain sensitization also is among the suggestions, and it's related to the discussion we had yesterday at the pain session. So, there. Now I'd like to ask you to please let us know which important generic effect modifying contextual factors that you feel are missing, if any. So you have to take a close look at the list. You can discuss with your neighbor if you want. But you have to use your own app to provide your answer. So it's a personal answer. In the app, you add factors as text separated with comma, and you have 3 minutes. And spoiler alert, we will ask the same question for all type of contextual factors. In separate questions, yeah. So for now, it's effect modifying contextual factors. Before we start, any clarifying questions to the task? All good? The task is understood, good? And if anyone is missing a list, then please let us know. And if you have troubles with the polling, also let us know. We have extra sheets for this one. Is it working? I think we move on to the discussion. And Dorte will help getting the microphone around. So if you have any comments to the exercise, some thoughts you have, please share it. These are the suggestions so far. Thank you so much for the suggestions. Maybe there's something else that you have in mind that you would like to share with us. There's more there? Oh, there's actually more. I'll scroll. And if you want to say something, please raise your hand to Mark. Oh, there's a hand up.
The single word comorbidities is potentially a huge item. Will you have some kind of ultimate list of all of the potential comorbidities that could be influencing, or how will you handle that?
So how we would handle like potential comorbidities. We haven't really moved into how we would measure it yet and what exactly we would do with it. So now we're just collecting all suggestions, and then we will do the binning and winnowing and things. You have a comment?
You look so safe there. I think it's fair to say, Philip, after the presentation, the lovely presentations we saw yesterday, that I learned that nociplastic pain, yes, no, could be a lovely example, also from my experience from inflammatory arthritis. As you were actually indicating from the podium as a feedback, we've seen as a principle that patients suffering from chronic widespread pain have been sorted out before running these trials on biologics, for example. Not in any bad, not for any bad purposes, just part of the inclusion criteria saying, make sure that, and then if that's, then exclude. So I think it depends on which of them we decide on, because you could also say cardiovascular disease, yes, no, but I don't think I'm able to say that I know that this is important. But so I think the answer would be, we'll take them piece by piece, one by one.
So within the concept of central sensitization, for example, it's not just pain, but it also influences fatigue, brain fog, cognition, et cetera. So potentially comorbidities is a good umbrella, but it has many different kinds of things under it. And our group brought up, well, why pick on liver function and not renal function, for example? Or
due to the drug metabolism? Would that be the mechanism of
drug clearance? And our group also brought up the idea of fast metabolizers and slow metabolizers, that sort of thing. But then we thought maybe that's under genetics. So, okay. Big task.
Yeah, but maybe an answer to your question would be comorbidity, yes, no, that's probably not doable. That would be too big with these patients.
Right. And will we get a chance to take a look at your literature compilation at some point? All of the papers that you're looking at that came out as being evaluable. Will we get to see that list, just to see it, run it over to see if we think you're missing something key for some reason or another?
You want to answer that, or? Okay, I mean, we will, of course, I mean, so yeah, we will publish it, and we would, of course, if I answer your question correct, sorry if I didn't, we will put all a list of all the studies that went into the scoping review, of course, and also all the factors that we found. Yeah. So,
and at what stage will we get to see that? Hopefully before you actually write the article.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we will. Yeah. There will also be some work to be done on, you know, like some of the things will be written in slightly different ways, but be the same thing. So we will need help with that for sure. And so, yeah, we'll need help in that process.
Just for clarity, we have a very large group of collaborators that we kind of like invite on and off, depending on what people are interested in, whether they'll be part of these coming papers that our fellows are preparing, thanks to Sabrina's leadership.
Any other things before we move on to the next one? No, it doesn't seem. Then you can move on to the next poll, asking the same thing, just for outcome influencing contextual factors.
I think many people should worry about that. But yeah, again, highly inspired by the session yesterday. I think if the definition we might come up with for nociplastic pain, for example, if that's erroneous, then of course the whole thing gets broken, the whole system coming, then the prognosis of that would not be valuable.
I mean, for example, if you have a tool which has overlaps measuring things twice, so it is a clear I mean, this is much of the exercise OMRACT is doing. Yeah. So.
Good point. I hear you saying, so my comment to that would be the things that we have ahead of us before we start to kind of like endorse contextual factor measurements will be highly complicated, and we need to do a lot of thinking on how we validate measurements on X factors, to be honest. We have never tried that at OMRACT because we usually just get them and then we do some statistics and ask somebody to do it. Especially with confounders. Those of you who have tried handling cohort studies would know that the thing about adjusting for confounders is very often just very random, except maybe for sex and age. And also Ernst.
So I was the person who put the microbiota down. Actually, for that, I was thinking that the evidence is there. There are studies of microbiota and methotrexate published in Arthritis and Rheumatology, Genetics. So that bits are all done in terms of the evidence. What I did not consider when I put it in there is feasibility, of course. So obviously that would be one of the OMRAC filter that you have to consider. So I didn't factor that in and I put that answer down. So don't take it as something that I'm saying. So I thought for sick purpose, I thought I'll put it, it may be in the future, measuring microbiota is a lot easier, but I thought I'll just put it in there for completeness sake as well.
So I think, you know, trying to classify this as an experiment is not, it's not easy, especially since for determining that something is an effect modifier, you need a proof that it works differently. Like from a statistical perspective, you need to show that it interacts, right? So you need larger sample size. And sometimes I think it's very hard to predict what will happen and where to classify this. So I wonder where you envision this exercise is going. Like, you know, if you measure something in a trial, then you have to think ahead whether you'll be able to test whether something interacts or not upfront.
I wanted to start another place. Sorry, I just want to say we get that a lot, and we have discussed that a lot in the group. That to convince people to use these, we would need evidence. But on the other hand, we don't have any evidence unless we start to measure it and stratify for it and report it. Yeah, so it's like a bit in a circle, right? So that's why we're starting with consensus on an asset. And I mean, FDA is already stratifying, asking drug trials, the results should be stratified by age, sex, and race, ethnicity. So they already, you know, have some factors, and I think we should do the same. Maybe the same, maybe more, and maybe something that is relevant within, especially rheumatology. Yeah.
And kind of like to reassure you, don't worry about not finding statistical significance. It is a qualitative process we are entering here, because that's, some of you would know, that could be called a type 2 error, not sample size enough in each of the strata. Or from officially from this working group, you are allowed. Don't worry about type 2 errors for now.
There, yeah.
Just like to, yes, an additional comment. Two things were interesting to see. Access to care, for instance, is very common as a factor that may influence the relationship between the diagnosis and the outcome, or between the treatment and the outcome, etc. And in the same line, I saw twice in this poll and the previous poll that a factor could be an effect modifier as well as outcome influencing. It is absolutely not contradictory. It's possible, no problem. Statisticians know that they have to check for one before checking the other one, but it's not contradictory. So you can think of, like in the example before, the sex was having the two roles.
Martin, I'll give you the microphone because I wouldn't mute you on your and Lorito's point from previously.
Yeah, so we were struggling here at the table whether how to classify an effect modifying confounding factor, contextual factor, and an outcome influencing contextual factor if you have a factor that works through modifying the effect of a treatment, and the treatment works, it will also, of course, affect the outcome on treatment. But if the effect is purely through the modification of the effect, I would propose that such a factor be placed under the first and not under both or under the second, because the effect on outcome is mediated through the effect on treatment. Am I making myself clear, or is it?
I know
I
what you're
get
saying.
confused myself.
No.
So this is tough stuff,
Yeah.
but you don't want to sort of pollute your columns and your classification when everything does everything anyway, because then the classification is useless.
In terms of giving a tentative answer, I think it's a very fair and sophisticated question, but I think most of us are keen on checklists. So people doing a cohort study, they should probably not, while they design the cohort study, worry too much about the trials and vice versa. So if you're planning a trial, you would like to look up from OMERACT which are the standard, which are the proposed effect modifiers. So I'm suggesting that these headings could be handled independently, mutually independently. So either you're a cohort researcher, or you're a trialist, or you're a psychometrician developing a new tool.
Yeah,
so that's why, as I think what Francis was indicating, we will probably see sex and age in all three of them without biasing you too much. No, okay. Alison has a comment.
I'm really struck by the importance of this concept of contextual factors, but of course, like many, probably not entirely clear of the distinction and the overlap between the different ones. Could you just share some guidance for other groups, for other working groups who are in their stages of identifying domains, most importantly domains, and how this might influence or should be factored into their work?
That's a good question. I don't know if that's more right recommendation that should be I don't know, Dorcas, what is the what's the official recommendation now? I'm not
not in that amount of detail, but I think that might be something that we should be working on, or some guidance to how to actually implement this. When should you be thinking about it? Where should, I mean, it's in the framework that you should be looking at contextual factors when you're selecting your outcomes. But
so we are building the checklist, which I suggested to Martin, but it's not available yet, Alison. So it's work in progress, that's for sure. That's why it's important that so many buy in across working groups, since we want to be rheumatology generic.
Yeah, I just wanted to see the cross-fertilizing.
I think it's time we move on to the last one. So please use the polls, discuss with your neighbor, and then we'll go into the discussion in a moment, in some minutes. Yeah, I think it's time we move on to the discussion so we can be on time. Sorry, everyone. Robin, I think it's time. Sorry. I think it's time we move on to the discussion. There's been a lot of suggestions. I'll just scroll through the, what? Yeah, sorry. I'll just scroll slowly through it, and raise your hand if you have comments to what you discussed or anything else. Yeah.
These are more questions. Is one of when we have discrepancies between clinical exam and more objective markers like ultrasound or MRI, does that fit into this column, or is it something different?
Discrepancy between what, sorry?
So for example, when we're doing swollen joint counts, and one investigator may consider a joint swollen and another not, and then the ultrasound or MRI can give you a more objective result. Where does that fall in this list somewhere?
Yes, that would be about validity, I guess. To compare with a gold standard. That's how I interpret it. Is that how you thought of it?
Okay.
Then I would mean that it would fit into the measurement affecting contextual factors, like what we are discussing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Agree.
And when you use the phrase chronic pain, is that the same or different than what we were talking about yesterday about the different types of pain?
That I cannot answer because it's suggestions I received. But you can let me know what you think. Like
you know what I think.
Sorry.
Just from the pediatric perspective, the proxy reporter, I see a couple of people put it down as well. We know the parents and the patients often disagree, and then which one do you pick? Similar to the imaging, right? You might have a different response depending on who you ask. So how do you reconcile that?
Good example.
Would in this case, for example, also in terms of use prompts, PROs, would participant burden also apply? Like the number of prompts, number of tools you use? Like at some point later on, people might just be ticking the boxes because you're getting exhausted, etc.
The answer is yes, but I won't speak to it. No.
You have in there cultural attitudes towards the disease, but I think what you miss is cultural attitudes towards research / like health beliefs, because a lot of the indigenous populations, for instance, will not answer any question honestly because they think they will be penalized. So everything is like, oh yes, I do this, because they are afraid that there will be consequences if they fill out that they're not adherent or anything like that. So I think you need to, with measurements, really take that into account.
That's a lovely example because it reminds me of some of my colleagues talking about medical legal issues. So people might not respond truthfully without offending any patients, that's for sure. But it's simply part of the premise of why they are there. Doctors likewise. Yeah, and that's clinimetrics. Yeah. Very good point.
My question, my question is around where would or whether this has been accounted for, might be a confounding factor, but measurement bias, right? So I don't know an example from the medical system, but for example, in like facial recognition and classification, the training mechanism for it uses a certain amount of biased data, which then influences the tool for measurement, right? So I'm wondering, depending on the tool, so survey design can be biased depending on like the design of the question, for example, right? So I'm just wondering how bias is accounted for, which is why I'm saying it might be a confounding factor and not necessarily a measurement factor, but I'm not quite sure whether that's been accounted for.
Do you want to say something about that?
Actually, it's a very good point, Maya. There's been data, for example, related to pulse oximetry, but also we have it in psoriasis related to people of color having issues. So with the pulse oximeter, that they tend to have falsely high readings in people of color because that's not how the instrument was designed. And then even the PASI and scoring skin was not really made relatable to people of color. So it's a great point.
I could add, while Sabrina is finding our presentation again, that I think these aspects is of course relevant to, kind of as a basic principle. These words should be involved in all working groups. If you're developing a tool, of course, you're doing your best to develop it according to best practices. Now you just have an extra thing to consider, whether, let's say, male versus female as a very simple case, whether you should probably test that while you start developing your measurement. I think that would be our immediate wish, like the elders, the elderly versus the youngers, and like the parent. We are already talking about that in the JIA group, I know, whether we can trust the caregiver as much as the kid itself. So the obvious questions in any working group are relevant to this group as well. But if it's too specific, we might put it on an extra list, because as I suggested to Martin, we are looking for checklists that will help all the groups at OMREC in the future.
Yes, exactly. There you go.
It's a pleasure for me to wrap up this interesting meeting. And first of all, I want, on behalf of all the participants online and on-site, thank the leaders and especially Sabrina for the excellent preparation and the nice discussions that we had. And the brief wrap up is that we can look forward to the scoping reviews that were presented, the preliminary results, and there will follow a Delphi result on the longer term, and we need your input for that. So it's good that we have been discussing the challenges with the different types of contextual factors, and it's also a plea to please continue using contextual factors, either type, in your research when you are designing observational studies and trials. And as an inspiration, Sabrina added a recent editorial from Nature that encourages us to, or says that it's necessary to include sex and gender when reporting each study that you do. So thank you very much. Enjoy the last day of OMRACT, and we look forward to your responses to the Delphi.
Thank you.